A lot of the people that I'm in leagues with are my buddies. So regardless of whether we're doing a fantasy football league or not, I'm still gonna hang out with them. It's no different. It just gives us something more to trash talk each other about.
I just choose to control it at a very high level, I guess. Like, it's one of my favorite things to do. For me, it's mainly finding a competitive release. I'm a very competitive person. It's not for the money, it's for the banner.
It's a social thing because it's fun to, get together with your friends and, have the draft and just kind of hang out with everybody and talk trash to everybody. There was a certain amount of trash talk. I was in a league with all guys, so that was really, to be expected. But there was a lot of fun about it too. The seriousness of it wasn't there, so I liked the experience of it being fun and more laid back.
You work your 40-hour week and then you have your other job, which is, fantasy sports. It's just like a job. And hopefully at the end of the season, it pays well.
Background with fantasy sports, what you've done, what you currently do.
Well, I've been doing fantasy sports for about 5 years now, at least on a fairly regular basis. Do football, basketball, baseball, so pretty much run the entire length of the season. Only been doing basketball and baseball the last couple of years, started out football, that's my favorite.
First time I played fantasy sports of any kind, or fantasy football, probably high school, right when, AOL came out. All my friends were like, hey, we found fantasy baseball, fantasy football. You're 15, 16 years old, and they said $20 entry fee. It was just a group of 8 of us. Followed it every week. Come home, check your computer. We'll wait for the dial-up to work. Hope to God that nobody answered, called the phone because your internet would cut out.
I can't honestly tell you how I got started in it. Probably, most likely, through somebody I was dating. I would only do like a couple leagues, maybe tops. Been doing it probably 4 or 5 years, 6 maybe. My first year actually having my own fantasy team was this year. Even though I always gave input towards others' fantasy teams, this was the first year I had my own.
I do fantasy football, shy away from fantasy baseball and all those things just because I don't have the time for that long of a season. But fantasy football, got in with just a bunch of buddies, similar to having a poker night. Used to do it with college buddies, and it kind of crept over after we graduated college, and then we had family friends, and being in a couple of them at a time got too much. And I played, the broad spectrum of low buy-in to higher buy-in.
How would you rate your level of involvement in fantasy sports? So on a scale from very high to very low or low?
I'd say above medium, but below high. I'd say right in there.
I don't know, whatever the highest end of the scale is. I don't think you'll find too many people who are more competitive in fantasy sports than I am.
Just above low. I do the minimal possible effort to keep my team alive.
I definitely think I would be in the low side of things. I enjoy football. That's the fantasy sport that I'm most involved with. I would probably give myself a solid maybe 5, somewhere in the middle. I care a little bit, not a lot, but more than like somebody that just does it for fun.
What type of activities do you take part in?
A lot of it is if I'm doing the traditional fantasy daily or the fantasy lineups, setting rosters, looking at players to pick up, things of that nature. Just basically weekly maintenance, things like that.
Just moving players around, seeing if anybody's injured, if anybody that had a good game last week is available. Once I kind of had my players in place, I was loyal to them. I didn't really, unless I was struggling as far as injury or bye weeks, my lineup really stayed pretty much the same.
For a guy like me, I'm more of, are my guys healthy? Are they going to play this week? Who are they playing? Kind of going through that 15-minute assessment of the team and then lock it in.
Always check your week before your results and who was good and who was not, or if somebody tweaked their ankle. And you're checking injury transactions and you're checking, you know, if they're the last couple weeks and then you go back a few weeks before to see how they did, and it causes a lot of headaches half the time because you're checking so many transactions and so many updates and just info and advice, and all you want to do is pull your hair out.
How would you define addiction as it relates to behaviors exhibited by individuals towards maybe a specific activity?
I think broadly, a person could become quote unquote addicted to a number of activities, whether it's gambling, whether it's drinking, whether it's sex, whether it's coffee for that matter. Where it becomes problematic is when it begins to, in my estimation, interfere in other significant areas of their lives.
You can't stop when you choose to. Or maybe you don't even choose to. You can't stop. You want to keep going and going to get the benefit of what you've had in the past. The high. You can never win enough because you win just a little bit and you get a taste of that win, and then you want more and more and more.
Do you think there is a potential for fantasy sports to become addictive for a participant?
Well, it's interesting, with the term fantasy in it already, so it's already sort of, making me kind of wonder what's going on here. It's nice to have fantasies, as long as the fantasy doesn't begin to sort of infringe upon your reality. Having a pastime, so for example, looking at a video game, enjoying that maybe 15, 20 minutes, half hour a day, no problem. When it starts to interfere with your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with your kids, I think we have a problem.
Definitely can become addictive, where that's all you think about. Even if you're at work or you have the radio on, that's all that's in your mind. In a way, it's like you're playing the sport in your head all the time.
There are people out there that are naturally sucked into addictive things, and frankly, if you probably ask those people, are you addicted to fantasy football, they're going to laugh in your face because it's, why would I be addicted to fantasy football?
It may be unhealthy if you're spending more time on that than you are having a conversation with somebody. When it cuts into time spending with your family, or if your job performance has dropped or your school performance has dropped, that's when it becomes a problem.
I'm sure there's a handful of people I can name off that would say that I'm obsessed with fantasy sports. But I don't think it's that bad.
If you caught me last year, it would have definitely been excessive. I was doing daily last year pretty much every day. I guess I never really looked at it like that.
Not for me. I could see how it could become that way, but I guess I don't obsessively check it to the point where it is unhealthy. Maybe borderline unhealthy, but not too bad.
How would you define problem gambling in sports? And how would you think that fantasy sports gambling is similar or different to casino gambling?
I guess I would say, again, and it's not going to be unlike any other kind of what I call addictive behavior or deeply ingrained habit. There's a lack of awareness of what's going on. There can be a certain compulsiveness where there's almost, because of the lack of awareness, there's also a lack of freedom. The potential of an immediate reward and payoff. Part of the mix here has to do with the temperament that the person brings to the situation. Some people who are really drawn to highly complex situations with a lot of variables. It's the strategizing. It's the culling together all these different variables into sort of a winning formula. Then there's the setting itself. Is it something you do solitary, or is it something you're doing, with others in public?
If you win, you're probably in trouble. If you have the addictive personality, because again, you have that excitement because you won, and regardless what kind of addiction it is, you want that again. And people don't usually remember the bad part. People will say, oh, I won, $500. Okay, how much did you lose to win $500?
There's people that, they could go gamble at the casinos, they could go gamble on the lottery, and they'll keep doing it. I'm gonna spend this much money, spend all this time on this league, but at the end of the season, I'm gonna win $1,200.
I think for somebody like me, I don't have an addictive personality, so paying $20 once a year to be in a fantasy league is no big deal. There's a lot of people that have addictive personalities. Once they start paying in and they see maybe a return, they're going to start paying more in, it can become a real issue.
The money isn't a huge incentive for me. Obviously, it's nice when you win money, but you know, when it's a tank of gas worth or it's this or that, it's no big deal. It's not going to make or break the bank at all, and I'm not shooting for the jackpot.
Maybe the thought of, well, I can have this amount of money, but I could have this amount of money if I won. Think that there's a chance that they could make a lot more money than they have.
How much money have you spent on fantasy sports leagues?
For the season-long leagues, that usually comes out to the amount of total money I put into it is usually somewhere in the neighborhood of, I'd call it $300 to $400 for the season long. I've probably spent roughly $500 on daily fantasy sports within the last 6 months.
In the last couple of years, it's been about $200 a year.
$20. It's anywhere from like 60 to 80 a year.
99% of the time I'm doing one $5 or $10 buy-in.
Have you made back?
No, it's all gone.
I didn't win my league, so no, I didn't get it back. It was just a league fee.
Why do you keep coming back to it if you lose money?
Every year it's like a new year. You can start over.
Redemption, I would say. A big part of that's redemption. You know, you could be last in the league, and then you pay your money for the next year. And then if you win, you can say, I came back from zero and now I'm the hero.
There's such a thing called the dopamine reward system. And a lot of the research now in terms of addiction studies has to do with the role of this reward system in the brain. The lure of gambling is that, wow, I won once, and all it takes is, you know, I just press the lever one more time perhaps. I could get immediately rewarded, okay? And so there's always this, just one more time, what might just be around the corner, the big payoff.
If you keep putting money in, you know, odds are that eventually you're gonna win. That's why people play the Powerball or go to the casino and try to win the big jackpot. It might be their lucky day where they could potentially come out with a victory.
Not everyone who gambles and not everyone who gets involved with fantasy sports does that behavior become problematic for. People who are oftentimes who don't have other behavioral options to choose from, I think we have a problem.
How did you first learn about these different fantasy sports websites, these mobile phone apps, these technologies related to fantasy sports?
When I was getting involved with the league, I don't have internet at home. So I was like, I really hope I can do this through an app. And a friend told me that ESPN Fantasy Sports had an app. And I was like, phew. I think the app started coming out maybe a little bit after I first got in. Possibly somebody had told me. Red Zone I learned through my husband.
It was a FanDuel commercial. I remember watching football a couple years ago, seeing an ad for FanDuel and being like, oh, well, I guess that looks interesting. I like doing fantasy sports and I like money, so let's give it a shot.
At school, on Yahoo Sports was huge when I was in junior high school. As the years progressed, we got into ESPN and all these other fantasy leagues that were popping up.
I have an IT background, so just being in the IT industry, you hear about things and you know, with some cool stuff that people were doing, and when they were just starting up some of the fantasy ideas, it interested me because I was a fan. I'm like, oh, you know, what are they doing with this, and what's their end goal here?
How many hours per week on average do you spend using fantasy sports technology?
I would say no more than 5 hours. Besides looking at it right before and maybe listening to a podcast or two, I'd say maybe 2 hours a week.
10, 15 hours a week, about maybe 2 hours a day.
Do you ever feel like you can't stop looking at fantasy sports technology?
Yeah, I often second guess my choices, go back and forth and back and forth a little bit, but I would say I don't know that I spent more than 5 hours checking my fantasy sport.
I'm always checking it for football tips, baseball stats, baseball news. DirecTV has the NFL Network and the NFL Ticket, where you're watching from 11:30 in the morning until 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night.
Why do you think it's so difficult to put away or stop using fantasy sports technology?
Right. It's sort of like when you lock the door, you have to go back and check it two or three times and make sure it's locked, okay? So there are certain characteristics of obsessive kind of compulsive sorts of behaviors, which may have biological roots in terms of your brain chemistry, as well as reinforced habitual patterns.
It's the process, it's the anticipation that, oh, maybe this is my team. It's everywhere. I mean, no matter where you go, the technology is available. It's so accessible and it's 24 hours and it's like instant, you can know what's going on.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, you know. It's kind of oversaturated. I think there's a lot of choices, and if it gets too much more saturated, I think that you might scare some folks off.
It can definitely add to the addictive nature of fantasy, that's for sure. At any time, at any point, you can look and see. At any player you want to look, there's all the information right there. I could see how that would definitely add to how addictive it can be.
Do you think fantasy sports technology, is that a good thing or bad thing for somebody who has a tendency to become like obsessed?
It's terrible. It's just like an enabling a drug addict, right? So if I was addicted to pain medication, it's like putting me in a room surrounded by pain medication. That's not good.
I think that it is dangerous though, because it is so highly addictive. I think that it really can be addictive for people because it is so accessible. You can have it in the palm of your hand all the time.
There's different levels on how I see it and how I think other people would see it. For me, obsessed is like crazy. There's always a possibility out there, I would think.
There's no time for reflection between the desire, okay, and the desired goal, which is to win or even to know. It just points to the immediacy of the reward, the immediacy of the gratification, really short-circuiting any reflection upon how this behavior might be impacting their own well-being or the well-being perhaps of their family over the long term.
Do you have any suggestions on where someone who has an obsession to an activity like fantasy sports gambling, fantasy sports technology, where they can go to get help for that?
Well, I would suggest that if someone actually feels that their life is sort of being hijacked by this in terms of their relationships with their spouse, their children, their work, they stop going to classes, the best thing to do would probably be to seek out some sort of mental health or substance abuse counseling, local mental health clinic, Gamblers Anonymous.
The Wisconsin Council on Problem Gambling, Ministry Behavioral Help, they have to know there is always hope, that they can stop, that there's people out there that will help.
I don't believe that it would be good to be consumed that much with fantasy. I don't see how you could support yourself doing just fantasy. Eventually I would feel like you'd want to pull yourself out of fantasy and enter reality.
I guess I don't see it being a really unhealthy activity. I mean, if they're blowing like massive amounts of money, racking up credit card bills, I don't think it's gonna, crush society or anything like that.
There are people addicted. It could be very easily for these people to be addicted, and the addiction could keep growing throughout the years.